The morning sun cast long shadows across the emerald grass of Sunset Hills Dog Park. As I watched my 3-year-old rescue Charlie bound toward the water fountain, with his distinctive lopsided gait. His coat was a patchwork of brown, black, and white that spoke of generations of mixed heritage, and his ears flopped in opposite directions, like nature couldn't decide which breed to favor. To me, he was perfect. To Victoria Sterling and her pristine golden retriever standing 20 feet away, he was apparently an embarrassment to the species. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Oh my goodness, Sarah," Victoria called out, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness as she approached with her champion dog Duke, prancing beside her on a hand-braided leather leash that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "You're not seriously thinking of entering that mix in next month's Golden State Championship, are you?" I felt my cheeks burn as other dog owners within earshot turned to watch our conversation. Victoria Sterling wasn't just any dog owner in our small Riverside County community. She was royalty in the canine world, owner of Sterling Kennels, breeder of multiple Best in Show winners, and someone who treated the local dog park like her personal kingdom. When Victoria spoke, people listened, and right now, she was making sure everyone heard her opinion of my beloved Charlie. "Actually, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady as Charlie trotted back to my side, his tail wagging with innocent joy, completely unaware of the judgment being passed on his mixed heritage. The show is open to all AKC-registered dogs, and Charlie earned his Canine Good Citizen certification last month. Victoria's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane, beautiful and sharp enough to cut. "Oh honey, there's a difference between a community obedience test and real competition. These judges know quality when they see it. They can spot proper breeding, correct conformation, breed standards." Her eyes swept over Charlie with the kind of dismissive glance usually reserved for counterfeit handbags. "This isn't a rescue parade, it's serious dog showing." Richard Pemberton, who'd been pretending to check his phone while clearly eavesdropping, decided to join the conversation. Richard owned 3 German Shepherds, all with names longer than most people's addresses, and he'd been competing in dog shows since before I was born. His presence at our little Saturday morning gathering usually meant someone was about to receive an unwanted education in proper dog handling. "Sarah, right?" he said, approaching with his lead dog, a magnificent black and tan female named Baroness Gretchen von Himmel, or something equally elaborate. "Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do here. Rescue dogs are wonderful pets, truly wonderful. But competition showing is about preserving breed integrity, maintaining standards that have been established over generations. It's not about participation trophies or feel-good stories." I felt Charlie lean against my leg, his warm weight grounding me as the conversation spiraled into territory I'd been dreading. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned my decision to enter Charlie in sanctioned competitions, but it was the first time it had happened so publicly, with such obvious condescension, in front of people whose opinions carried weight in our tight-knit dog community. "Charlie isn't just a pet," I said, my voice gaining strength as I looked down at my dog whose intelligent brown eyes were fixed on my face with the kind of unwavering attention that spoke of deep training and deeper bond. "He's been working toward this for 2 years. We've competed in agility trials, rally competitions, and he's earned titles in 3 different sports. His mixed heritage doesn't make him less worthy of recognition." Victoria exchanged a look with Richard that spoke volumes. It was the kind of look that passed between people who believed they were protecting something sacred from someone who clearly didn't understand its value. The kind of look that said, "Bless her heart, but she's out of her league." "Sarah," Victoria said, her tone shifting to something that might have been intended as maternal but landed closer to patronizing. "I think it's wonderful that you've bonded with your rescue." "Really, I do. But the Golden State Championship isn't a local fun match. There will be professional handlers there, dogs with championship bloodlines, serious money invested in breeding programs. The judge, Patricia Wells, has been evaluating dogs for 30 years. She'll take one look at your Charlie and you'll be dismissed before you even get to the individual examination." The words hit like physical blows, not just because of their cruelty, but because of the seed of doubt they planted. I'd been preparing for this show for months, believing in Charlie's abilities, convinced that his intelligence, trainability, and sheer heart would speak louder than his mixed breeding. But standing there in the morning sun, surrounded by purebred perfection and people who saw my dog as a pretender to their throne, I felt my confidence cracking. "You know what the worst part will be?" Richard added, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen this scenario play out before. "The embarrassment. Not just for you, but for Charlie. Dogs can sense when they don't belong, when they're out of their element. You'll put him in that ring with dogs that have been bred for generations to excel in conformation, and he'll know he doesn't measure up. Is that really fair to him?" Other dog owners had gathered around us now, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Others nodding in agreement with Victoria and Richard's assessment. I recognized faces from our regular Saturday gatherings. People who'd watched Charlie grow from a skinny, scared rescue into the confident, well-trained dog he'd become. But now, under the weight of Victoria's disapproval and Richard's experience, they seemed to be seeing him differently. Seeing him as I was beginning to see him in that moment, as an imposter in a world where bloodlines mattered more than character. "Maybe they have a point, Sarah," said Janet Morrison, whose border collie had played with Charlie countless times. "I mean, these people know what they're talking about. Maybe there are other competitions that would be more appropriate?" The word appropriate hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't put out. Appropriate. As if my dog's worth could be measured by the purity of his genetics, rather than the depth of his training or the strength of his spirit. As if love and dedication could be dismissed by a pedigree paper he'd never possess. Charlie looked up at me with those trusting brown eyes, his tail still wagging slowly, still believing in me, even as I felt my belief in us wavering. He had no idea that his mixed heritage was being used as evidence of his inadequacy. He only knew that I was his person, that we were a team, and that whatever came next, we'd face it together. But standing there in that circle of judgment, surrounded by people who saw him as a charity case rather than a competitor, I felt something inside me break. Not my love for Charlie that would never waver, but my confidence in our place in their world. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'd been living in a fantasy, thinking that heart and training could overcome the rigid hierarchies of purebred dog showing. "I should probably get going," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own doubt. "Charlie needs his breakfast." "Think about what we've said, Sarah," Victoria called after me as I turned to leave, Charlie trotting beside me with his characteristic happy bounce, oblivious to the verdict that had just been passed on his prospects. "There's no shame in knowing your place. Charlie's a lovely pet. There's nothing wrong with keeping him in that role." As we walked toward my car, I could hear the conversation continuing behind us, voices lowered but still audible. Words like unrealistic expectations and quotes, setting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Herself up for failure and, quote, "someone should have told her sooner," floated on the morning air like accusations I couldn't escape. I opened the back door of my Honda Civic, and Charlie jumped in with practiced ease, settling into his travel crate with the kind of calm confidence that came from thousands of car rides to training sessions, competitions, and adventures together. He trusted me completely, believed in our partnership absolutely, and had no idea that I was beginning to question everything we'd worked toward. The drive home was silent except for the gentle sound of Charlie's breathing from the back seat, and the occasional whimper of excitement when we passed familiar landmarks. He loved car rides, loved going places with me, loved the anticipation of whatever adventure waited at our destination. Today, our destination was home, but the adventure he was anticipating was a competition that I was no longer sure we belonged in. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm 35 years old, though some days I feel decades older, and others I feel like I'm still that 20-something veterinary assistant who thought she could save every animal that crossed her path. I work at Riverside Animal Clinic, a small practice nestled between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore on Main Street in our quiet California town, where everyone knows everyone else's business and dogs are considered family members with voting rights. 3 years ago, I wasn't thinking about dog shows or breed standards or the complex social hierarchies that govern the canine competition world. 3 years ago, I was just trying to save one dog's life, and I had no idea that decision would lead me to question everything I thought I knew about worth, belonging, and the courage it takes to believe in yourself when the whole world seems determined to prove you wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Animal Control brought Charlie in, though he wasn't Charlie then. He was just case number 47,291, a 3-month-old puppy found wandering Highway 91 with no collar, no chip, and no one looking for him. He was skinny to the point of showing ribs, covered in fleas, and had an eye infection that had left him partially blind in his left eye. But what I remember most about that first day wasn't his physical condition. It was the way he looked at me. Even through the pain and fear and confusion of being in a strange place with strange people, there was something in his expression that spoke of intelligence, resilience, and an almost desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might see him as worth saving. Dr. Rebecca Collins, the clinic's owner and my mentor, took one look at him and shook her head. "Expensive medical needs, mixed breed, partial vision impairment," she said, not unkindly, but with the practical assessment of someone who'd seen thousands of cases like this. "Animal Control will probably recommend euthanasia if no one claims him in 72 hours. It's not fair, but with limited resources and so many healthy dogs needing homes." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I'd been working in veterinary medicine for 8 years by then. I understood the harsh mathematics of animal rescue, where difficult cases often became impossible choices. But something about this particular puppy made those numbers irrelevant. Maybe it was the way he tried to wag his tail, even while trembling with fear. Maybe it was how he instinctively leaned into my touch when I examined him, as if he somehow knew I was trying to help. Or maybe it was simply that I saw something in him that reminded me of myself. Scrappy, determined, and used to fighting for recognition in a world that often overlooked the unconventional. "I'll take him," I said before I could second-guess myself. "I'll cover his medical expenses and handle the fostering paperwork." "Sarah," Dr. Collins said gently, "you know how this story usually ends. You get attached, you adopt, and then you're emotionally and financially invested in a pet with ongoing health issues. It's admirable, but it's not sustainable." She was right, of course. I'd already adopted 2 cats and a one-eyed beagle mix. Through similar circumstances, my apartment was becoming a sanctuary for animals that other people deemed too damaged, too expensive, or too complicated to love. But looking at this puppy, I couldn't bring myself to care about sustainability or practical considerations. Some connections transcend logic, and whatever was happening between me and case number 47,291 fell into that category. The first few weeks were rough. The eye infection required daily medications and multiple veterinary visits. His malnutrition had affected his growth, leaving him smaller than breed standards would suggest for his apparent mix of German Shepherd, Border Collie, and what Dr. Collins diplomatically called, quote, "other influences." But as his physical health improved, his personality began to emerge, and it became clear that his mixed heritage had given him something special. He was intelligent in a way that seemed to combine the best traits of his various breeds. He had the German Shepherd's loyalty and protectiveness, the Border Collie's problem-solving ability and eagerness to work, and some indefinable quality that made him incredibly attuned to human emotions and intentions. When I was sad, he'd rest his head on my lap with gentle insistence. When I was happy, he'd bounce around the apartment with infectious joy. And when I was focused on something, he'd settle nearby and watch with the kind of intense attention that suggested he was learning from every interaction. It was Marcus Chen, my coworker at the clinic, who first suggested that Charlie might have potential beyond being a beloved pet. Marcus had grown up in a family of dog enthusiasts and had competed in various canine sports throughout his childhood and college years. He'd watched Charlie during his recovery, noticed how quickly he learned commands, how eagerly he engaged with training exercises, and how naturally he seemed to understand what people wanted from him. "Have you ever thought about getting him into competition?" Marcus asked one afternoon as we watched Charlie demonstrate a perfect sit-stay, while cats wandered around him, testing his focus. "I know he's a mix, but AKC has programs for mixed breeds now. And honestly, Sarah, I've seen plenty of purebreds with half his drive and intelligence. The idea seemed impossible at first. Competition dogs came from carefully planned breeding programs, cost thousands of dollars, and were handled by people who'd been involved in the dog world since childhood. I was a veterinary assistant who lived in a one-bedroom apartment and had adopted a highway rescue. But Marcus persisted, bringing me articles about mixed breed competitions, stories of rescue dogs who'd earned titles in various sports, and information about local training classes that welcomed all dogs regardless of pedigree. "The thing is," he said one evening as we closed up the clinic, "Charlie doesn't know he's supposed to be disadvantaged. He just knows he loves working with you and he's good at learning new things. That's a pretty solid foundation for any kind of training." The first obedience class was terrifying. I'd never been in a formal training environment, and walking into the Riverside Community Center with Charlie on a basic nylon leash, surrounded by people with professional equipment and dogs whose names included words like champion and grand, I felt like we were crashing a party we hadn't been invited to. But Elena Rodriguez, the instructor, welcomed us with the kind of warmth that suggested she'd seen plenty of nervous newcomers and understood exactly what we were feeling. Elena was in her 60s, a retired professional dog trainer who'd spent 40 years working with dogs of every breed and background. She'd handled everything from Best in Show winners to former fighting dogs being rehabilitated for family life. Her approach was practical, patient, and based on the radical notion that every dog had potential if you could figure out how to unlock it. "Tell me about Charlie," she said during our first session, watching as he sat politely beside me while other dogs were still figuring out the basic concept of attention. "What's his story?" I told her about the highway rescue, the medical issues, his mixed heritage, and my complete lack of experience in competitive dog training. I expected her to suggest we start with basic pet obedience and work our way up gradually. Instead, she knelt down and looked Charlie directly in the eyes, studying him with the kind of professional assessment that made me nervous. "This dog has been waiting for a job," she said finally, standing up with a smile that suggested she'd discovered something interesting. "Look at his focus, his body language, the way he's watching your face for cues. Mixed breed or not, he's got the mindset of a working dog. The question is, are you ready to give him the kind of work he's capable of?" Over the following months, Charlie and I threw ourselves into training with the kind of intensity usually reserved for Olympic preparation. Elena started us with basic obedience, but it quickly became clear that Charlie was capable of much more advanced work. He mastered heel position, recalls, and stays with an ease that surprised even Elena. His mixed heritage, rather than being a disadvantage, seemed to give him a versatility that purebred dogs sometimes lacked. "Border collies are brilliant, but they can be obsessive," Elena explained as Charlie seamlessly transitioned from a downstay to a recall to a perfect heel position. "German Shepherds are loyal and trainable, but they can be single-minded. Charlie seems to have gotten the best of both worlds, plus whatever else is in his genetic mix. He's focused but flexible, eager but not frantic." We added agility training, and Charlie took to it like he'd been born for it. His smaller size, result of his early malnutrition, actually became an advantage as he navigated jumps and tunnels with grace and speed. His partial vision impairment, something I'd worried would limit his abilities, seemed to have heightened his other senses and made him more attuned to my voice commands and body language. Rally obedience became our specialty. The sport combined obedience training with navigation of a course marked by signs indicating different exercises. It required teamwork, communication, and the ability to work together smoothly while maintaining enthusiasm and precision. Charlie excelled at reading my subtle cues, anticipating direction changes, and maintaining the kind of focused attention that judges loved to see. Within 6 months, we'd earned our first title. Within a year, we had 3. Each ribbon, each certificate, each small victory felt like validation not just of Charlie's abilities, but of the bond we'd built together. We weren't just a woman and her rescue dog anymore. We were a team, partners in something that brought out the best in both of us. But it was Elena who first mentioned confirmation showing, and the idea terrified me more than any agility course or obedience routine ever had. Sports like rally and agility were about performance, about what a dog could do. Confirmation showing was about what a dog was, about breeding and bloodlines and standards that Charlie could never meet. "I know what you're thinking," Elena said one evening after a particularly successful training session. Conformation is different. It's about breed standards and physical perfection. But here's what most people don't understand about good conformation judging. It's not just about checking boxes on a breed standard. It's about evaluating the whole dog, the movement, the temperament, the presence. And Charlie has presence. She was right about that. There was something about Charlie that drew attention wherever we went. Maybe it was his confident carriage, the way he moved with purpose and grace despite his mixed heritage. Maybe it was his intelligence, visible in every alert expression and responsive glance. Or maybe it was simply the joy he radiated when he was working, the obvious pleasure he took in our partnership. The AKC has a mixed breed program now, Elena continued. Dogs compete in their own category, judged on their own merits rather than against breed standards they could never meet. It's about celebrating the whole dog, not just the purity of their genetics. The idea grew on me gradually, like a plant that takes root slowly but then flourishes with surprising vigor. Charlie and I had proven ourselves in performance events. But there was something appealing about the idea of having his overall quality recognized, his worth as a dog acknowledged regardless of his mixed heritage. It felt like the ultimate validation of everything we'd worked toward together. When I finally decided to enter the Golden State Championship, it felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. The entry fee alone was more than I'd ever spent on a single dog-related expense, and the preparation required was unlike anything we'd done before. But Elena assured me that Charlie was ready, that we were ready, and that sometimes the biggest risk was not taking any risk at all. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't place, she said with the practical wisdom of someone who'd seen hundreds of competitions. The best thing that can happen is that you discover just how good you really are. Either way, you'll know you gave Charlie the chance he deserves. For weeks leading up to the show, we practiced our conformation routine daily. Charlie learned to stand in a perfect stack, to move with proper gait on both sides, to allow examination by strangers while maintaining his composure and dignity. Elena coached me on handling techniques, ring etiquette, and the subtle art of presenting a dog to best advantage. But it was the morning at Sunset Hills Dog Park, surrounded by people who saw Charlie as a pretender rather than a competitor, that I realized how different our world was from theirs. Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton weren't just questioning our chances of success. They were questioning our right to try, our place in their carefully ordered universe, where bloodlines mattered more than heart and breeding papers carried more weight than actual ability. Driving home from the park that morning, Charlie happily panting in the back seat and completely unaware of the doubts now plaguing my mind, I wondered if I'd been living in a fantasy. Maybe they were right. Maybe love and training weren't enough to compete in a world built on genetics and tradition. Maybe Charlie's mixed heritage really would be seen as a disadvantage too significant to overcome, regardless of his intelligence, trainability, or the bond we'd built together. The Golden State Championship was still 3 weeks away, and for the first time since I'd mailed in our entry, I wasn't sure we should go through with it. Charlie deserved better than public humiliation, and maybe I was being selfish in pursuing a dream that would ultimately only highlight how different we were from everyone else in that world. But as I pulled into my apartment complex and Charlie's tail began wagging in anticipation of our arrival home, I realized that the decision wasn't just about a dog show anymore. It was about whether I believed in us enough to face the judgment of people who'd already decided we didn't belong, whether I was willing to give Charlie the chance to prove them wrong, even if it meant risking everything we'd built together on one Saturday afternoon in front of a judge who might see him exactly the way Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton did. That evening, as Charlie settled into his favorite spot on the couch beside me, his warm weight against my leg and his trusting eyes fixed on my face, I realized that whatever happened at the Golden State Championship, we'd already won something more important than any ribbon or title. We'd found each other, built something beautiful together, and created a partnership that no one could diminish with their opinions about bloodlines or breeding, or the proper place of rescue dogs in the world of competition. The question now was whether I had the courage to let the rest of the world see what I saw when I looked at Charlie. Not a mixed-breed pretender, but a dog whose heart and intelligence and sheer determination to please made him worthy of any ring, any judge, any competition we chose to enter. 3 weeks suddenly felt like both forever and no time at all. And I knew that whatever decision I made would change everything for both of us. The morning after the confrontation at Sunset Hills Dog Park, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Not because I was physically unwell, but because I couldn't face the concerned questions from Marcus and Dr. Collins about why I looked like I'd been crying, or why my usual enthusiasm for discussing Charlie's training progress had evaporated overnight. Instead, I spent the day in my pajamas, sitting on my living room floor surrounded by every ribbon, certificate, and trophy Charlie and I had earned together over the past 2 years. There were more than I'd realized when they were scattered across my apartment in their usual places: 47 ribbons in various colors, 12 certificates of achievement, and 8 trophies ranging from small plastic figures to the beautiful silver cup we'd won at the Regional Rally Championship 6 months earlier. Each piece represented hours of training, moments of triumph, and the gradual building of confidence that I now felt slipping away like sand through my fingers. Charlie seemed to sense my mood and stayed close, occasionally dropping his favorite tennis ball at my feet with the kind of gentle insistence that suggested he thought a game of fetch might cure whatever was troubling me. His optimism was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Here was a dog who'd been thrown away, literally left to die on a highway, and yet he approached each day with the assumption that good things were possible, that effort would be rewarded, and that the partnership we'd built was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. I picked up his very first ribbon, a yellow and white 4th place from a basic obedience match where he'd broken his stay to investigate a dropped hot dog in the next ring. Even that small failure had been educational, teaching us both about focus and distractions, and the importance of building reliability in increasingly challenging environments. Elena had laughed about the hot dog incident for weeks, calling it a perfect example of why food motivation needed to be balanced with impulse control. Elena. The thought of calling her with news that I was withdrawing from the Golden State Championship made my stomach clench. She'd invested almost as much time in our preparation as I had, staying late after group classes to work with us on advanced techniques, lending us equipment, and sharing insights from her decades of experience. She believed in Charlie in a way that felt almost fierce, and the idea of disappointing her was almost worse than the prospect of public humiliation at the dog show. But it was more than just disappointing Elena that worried me. Over the past 2 years, Charlie and I had become regulars at training facilities throughout Riverside County and the surrounding areas. We had friends in the dog sports community, people who'd watched our progress with interest and encouragement. What would they think if we suddenly disappeared from competition? Would they assume that Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton had been right all along? That we'd finally realized our limitations and accepted our proper place? The thought of being pitied was somehow worse than the thought of being laughed at. Pity implied that people had been humoring us all along, allowing us to believe we belonged in their world out of kindness, rather than genuine recognition of our abilities. The idea that our achievements might be viewed as participation trophies rather than earned victories made everything we'd accomplished feel hollow and false. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus asking if I was feeling better, and mentioning that a new rescue had come in that morning. A young Labrador mix with a broken leg who'd been hit by a car. Under normal circumstances, I would have been at the clinic immediately, unable to resist getting involved in the rehabilitation of another animal who'd been dealt a difficult hand by circumstances beyond their control. Today, I couldn't summon the energy to care about anything beyond the crisis of confidence that had settled over me like fog. Charlie brought me his leash, dropping it across my lap with the kind of meaningful look that suggested a walk might be exactly what we both needed. He was right, of course. Sitting in my apartment obsessing over the previous day's encounter wasn't solving anything, and Charlie needed his exercise regardless of my emotional state. But the thought of running into other dog owners, of having to explain why we looked defeated, of possibly encountering Victoria or Richard again, made me want to hide under my blankets until the whole Golden State Championship was over. Instead, I compromised by driving to Riverside Regional Park, a larger space where we were less likely to encounter the regular crowd from Sunset Hills. The park had hiking trails, open fields, and a dog-friendly creek where Charlie could swim and I could think, without the social pressures of our usual haunts. It felt like retreating, but sometimes retreat was necessary for regrouping and figuring out the next move. The morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of California sunshine that made everything look deceptively simple and manageable. Charlie bounded out of the car with his usual enthusiasm, immediately beginning his ritual inspection of interesting scents and territorial markers left by previous visitors. Watching him explore with such obvious joy, I was reminded of why I'd fallen in love with this dog in the first place. His capacity for happiness, his resilience in the face of adversity, and his absolute trust in me despite everything he'd endured before we found each other. We walked for nearly an hour before I worked up the courage to call Elena. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the kind of genuine pleasure that suggested she was always happy to hear from her students, regardless of the reason for the call. "Sarah, perfect timing," she said before I could even explain why I was calling. "I was just thinking about you and Charlie. I've been working on some new exercises that I think will really help with his ring presence, and I wanted to schedule some extra sessions before the championship. How does Thursday evening sound?" The enthusiasm in her voice made what I had to say even more difficult. "Elena, that's actually why I'm calling. I'm thinking about withdrawing from the show." The silence that followed was long enough for me to wonder if the call had been dropped. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice carefully neutral in the way that suggested she was choosing her words with great care. "Can you tell me what's happened? Last week you were excited and confident. Today you sound like someone's died." So I told her about the encounter at Sunset Hills, about Victoria's dismissive comments and Richard's lecture on breed integrity, about the way other dog owners had looked at Charlie differently once his mixed heritage was framed as a liability, rather than an interesting backstory. I told her about the doubts that had been eating at me since yesterday morning, the fear that I'd been living in a fantasy world where love and training could overcome genetics and social hierarchy. "I keep thinking that maybe they're right," I admitted, watching Charlie splash through the creek with obvious delight, completely unconcerned with the existential crisis his mixed breeding had apparently created. "Maybe I've been setting us up for failure by believing we belong in that world. Maybe it's not fair to Charlie to put him in a situation where he'll be judged against standards he can never meet." Elena listened without interrupting, letting me pour out all my fears and uncertainties before responding. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of steel that I'd never heard before. "Sarah, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. In 40 years of training dogs, I've seen plenty of beautiful, perfectly bred animals who couldn't perform under pressure, couldn't focus in challenging environments, or simply didn't have the heart for competition. And I've seen mixed breeds, rescues, and dogs that wouldn't win a beauty contest save their lives, who possessed something infinitely more valuable: the POE, desire to work, the intelligence to learn, and the partnership bond that makes great teams possible." She paused, and I could hear her moving around what I assumed was her training facility, probably setting up equipment for an afternoon class. "Charlie has all three of those qualities in abundance. More importantly, he has something that can't be bred or bought. He has you. He has a handler who understands him, believes in him, and has put in the work to help him reach his potential." "That's not common, Sarah. That's actually quite rare." "But what if the judge doesn't see it that way?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been keeping me awake since yesterday. "What if they look at him and just see a mixed breed pretender who doesn't belong in their ring?" "Then that says something about the judge, not about Charlie," Elena replied firmly. "But I happen to know Patricia Wells, and she's not that kind of judge. She's been evaluating dogs for 3 decades because she loves dogs, all dogs, and she recognizes quality when she sees it, regardless of pedigree. She's the kind of judge who will give Charlie a fair evaluation based on his merits, not his ancestry." I wanted to believe her, but the memory of Victoria's laughter and Richard's condescending lecture made it difficult to imagine anyone in the dog show world looking at Charlie with objective eyes. These people had invested their entire identities in the superiority of purebred animals. How could they possibly evaluate a mixed breed fairly when doing so would undermine everything they believed about genetics and breeding programs? "I understand your fear," Elena continued, as if she could read my thoughts through the phone. "But I want you to consider something. Charlie doesn't know he's supposed to be disadvantaged. He doesn't know that his mixed heritage makes him less worthy in some people's eyes. All he knows is that you're his partner, that he loves working with you, and that he's gotten really good at the things you've taught him. Are you going to let other people's prejudices rob him of the chance to show what he can do?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. I looked at Charlie, now lying in the shallow water of the creek with his chin resting on a smooth rock, eyes closed in contentment, and realized that Elena was right. Charlie had no idea that yesterday's conversation had happened. He woke up this morning expecting training, expecting work, expecting the partnership that had become the center of both our lives. My crisis of confidence was entirely my own creation, fueled by other people's opinions, rather than any actual change in Charlie's abilities or our relationship. "There's something else I want you to think about," Elena said, her voice softening slightly. "When you first brought Charlie to my classes, what did you see in him that made you think he could do more than just basic pet obedience?" I thought back to those early days, to the way Charlie had watched other dogs work with such intense focus, the way he'd offered behaviors without being asked, the obvious intelligence in his eyes, and the eagerness to please that made every training session feel like a conversation rather than a lesson. "He was so attentive," I said slowly, remembering. "Even when he didn't know what I wanted, he was trying to figure it out. And he seemed to enjoy the mental challenge, like solving puzzles was fun rather than work." "Exactly. And has any of that changed? Is he less intelligent today than he was yesterday? Less eager to work? Less bonded to you?" "No," I admitted. "If anything, he's gotten better. More confident, more responsive, I don't know how to describe it. More like a real partner." "That's because he is a real partner. And partnerships like yours don't come along often, Sarah. Most people in the dog world would give anything to have the kind of connection with their animals that you have with Charlie. Don't let a couple of small-minded individuals make you forget how special what you've built together really is." I felt something shifting inside me, like a weight being lifted that I hadn't realized I was carrying. Elena was right. Charlie and I had built something real together, something that existed independently of other people's opinions or approval. Our achievements over the past 2 years weren't accidents or flukes. They were the result of hard work, dedication, and a partnership that had grown stronger with every challenge we'd faced together. "What if I embarrass myself?" I asked, voicing one last fear. "What if I get in that ring and freeze up or forget everything I've learned? Or somehow let Charlie down when he's depending on me?" Elena laughed, not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who'd seen nervous handlers overcome their fears countless times before. "Sarah, you've been competing for 2 years. You've handled pressure, distractions, and challenging situations. You've never let Charlie down yet, and you're not going to start now. Besides, the day you stop being nervous before a big competition is the day it stops mattering to you. Nerves are normal. They're even helpful if you channel them correctly." We talked for another 20 minutes, with Elena sharing stories of other handlers who'd faced similar doubts and gone on to succeed beyond their wildest expectations. She told me about rescue dogs who'd earned championships, mixed breeds who'd outperformed expensive purebreds, and handlers who'd discovered that believing in yourself was more important than having other people's approval. By the time we hung up, I felt like myself again. Not completely confident, not free from doubt, but like someone who was willing to face uncertainty rather than hide from it. Charlie seemed to sense the change in my mood and bounded out of the creek to shake water all over my jeans, his tail wagging with the kind of joy that suggested he'd known all along that everything would work out fine. The drive home was different from the morning's journey to the park. Instead of fleeing from something, I felt like I was moving toward something. The Golden State Championship was still 2.5 weeks away, and I had work to do. Not just training with Charlie, but preparing myself mentally for the challenge of competing in an environment where some people would question our right to be there. That evening, I called Marcus to check on the injured Labrador who'd come in that morning. He was stable, but would need surgery and extensive rehabilitation, the kind of case that required both medical expertise and emotional support for an animal learning to trust humans again after being hurt. It was exactly the kind of situation I'd always been drawn to, and I found myself offering to help with the dog's recovery, even though I had my own challenges to focus on. "Are you feeling better?" Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. "You sounded pretty rough this morning." "I had some doubts about the dog show," I admitted. "People questioning whether Charlie and I belong in that world. I let it get to me more than I should have." "People are idiots," Marcus said with characteristic directness. "I've watched you two work together. I've seen Charlie's focus and drive and intelligence. If those people can't see what's right in front of them, that's their problem, not yours. It was a simple statement, but it carried weight coming from someone who'd grown up in the dog world and understood both its possibilities and its prejudices. Marcus had seen hundreds of dogs over the years, from expensive show prospects to mangy strays, and his assessment of Charlie's abilities wasn't influenced by sentimentality or wishful thinking. It was based on professional observation and genuine expertise. The next morning, I returned to work with renewed energy and purpose. The injured Labrador, who'd been named Hope by the overnight staff, was indeed a challenging case, but she was also exactly what I needed to remind myself why I'd fallen in love with animal care in the first place. Working with damaged creatures, helping them heal and trust again, seeing their personalities emerge as pain receded and confidence grew, this was where I belonged regardless of what happened at any dog show. But Charlie belonged somewhere too. And that somewhere wasn't limited to my apartment or the veterinary clinic or even the local dog park where people thought they could define his worth based on his pedigree. Charlie belonged wherever his talents could be recognized and appreciated, wherever his intelligence and eagerness could be channeled into meaningful work, wherever partnerships like ours were valued over ancestry and bloodlines. That evening, I pulled out the entry confirmation for the Golden State Championship and read through it carefully for the first time since it had arrived. The mixed breed competition was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, with individual examination and gating in the main ring, followed by group judging and awards. It was real, official, and exactly the kind of opportunity Elena had been telling me Charlie deserved. I also pulled out Elena's training notes from our recent sessions, detailed observations about Charlie's strengths and areas for improvement that showed the depth of her commitment to our success. She'd identified specific techniques for maximizing his natural grace in movement, strategies for maintaining his attention in distracting environments, and methods for helping him show his personality to best advantage. Reading through her notes, I was struck by how thoroughly she understood Charlie as an individual rather than just another dog in her classes. She'd noticed that he responded better to soft verbal encouragement than sharp commands, that he was more confident when I maintained physical contact during stacking, and that his natural curiosity could be channeled into the kind of alert, interested expression that judges found appealing. These were insights that could only come from someone who'd taken the time to really see Charlie, to understand his unique personality, and work with his natural tendencies rather than against them. Elena had invested in us not because she thought we might win, but because she believed we deserved the chance to find out what we were capable of achieving together. Over the next few days, I threw myself into preparation with renewed intensity. We practiced our routine every morning before work and every evening after dinner. I studied videos of conformation competitions, analyzed the techniques of successful handlers, and worked on my own presentation skills. Charlie seemed to sense the increased focus and responded with even greater precision and enthusiasm than usual. But it was Thursday evening's session with Elena that really changed everything. She'd set up the training area to simulate the actual ring conditions we'd face at the championship, complete with tables for examination, proper matting, and even a sound system playing the kind of ambient noise typical of large dog shows. From the moment we entered the space, Charlie's demeanor shifted into what I can only describe as performance mode. "Look at him," Elena said admiringly as Charlie moved into a perfect stack without being asked, his attention focused on me with laser intensity. "He knows this is important. He's ready to work." We ran through our entire routine 3 times, with Elena playing the role of judge and offering critiques after each run. Charlie's gating was smooth and confident, his stacking was textbook perfect, and his temperament during examination was exactly what judges hoped to see: alert but calm, interested but controlled. "I want you to watch something," Elena said after our final run-through. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video she'd taken during our second practice round. "This is what the judge is going to see when you two walk into that ring." Watching ourselves from an outside perspective was revealing in ways I hadn't expected. Charlie looked like a serious competitor, moving with purpose and confidence. But more than that, we looked like a team. Our communication was seamless, our timing was synchronized, and there was an obvious mutual trust and respect that made our partnership compelling to watch. "Do you see it now?" Elena asked. "Do you see what I see when I watch you two work together?" I did see it, and for the first time since the encounter at Sunset Hills Dog Park, I felt genuinely excited about the upcoming competition. Not just nervous or hopeful, but excited about the opportunity to show what Charlie and I had built together. To demonstrate that worth couldn't be measured by bloodlines or breeding papers or other people's expectations. "There's something else I want to show you," Elena said, walking over to a file cabinet in the corner of the training room. She pulled out a thick folder and handed it to me. "This is every note I've taken about Charlie over the past 2 years. Every observation, every breakthrough, every moment when he showed me something new about his capabilities." The folder was surprisingly heavy, filled with detailed training records that tracked Charlie's progress from basic obedience through advanced competition skills. Elena had documented everything: his learning speed, his problem-solving approaches, his emotional resilience, and the evolution of our partnership. Reading through her observations was like seeing Charlie through the eyes of a professional who understood not just what made dogs successful in competition, but what made them exceptional as individuals. "The last entry," Elena said, pointing to a note dated just the week before. "Read that one out loud." I found the entry and read, "Charlie continues to exceed expectations in every area of training. His intelligence and adaptability are remarkable, but what sets him apart is his emotional connection to Sarah and his genuine enjoyment of the work itself. This is a dog who was born to compete, who thrives under pressure and rises to meet challenges. Mixed heritage irrelevant. This animal possesses the heart and mind of a true competitor." Looking up from the folder, I saw Elena watching me with the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment, for me to really understand what she'd been seeing all along. "Heart and mind of a true competitor," I repeated, feeling the truth of those words settle into my bones. "You really believe that?" "Sarah, I've been training dogs for 40 years. I've worked with animals that cost more than most people's cars, and had perfect pedigrees going back 10 generations. And I'm telling you that Charlie is as good as any of them, better than most, not despite his mixed heritage, but because of everything that makes him who he is." That night, I lay in bed with Charlie curled up beside me, his warm weight against my leg and his steady breathing the most reassuring sound in the world. Tomorrow would mark exactly 2 weeks until the Golden State Championship, 2 weeks to fine-tune our routine and prepare mentally for what felt like the most important test of our partnership. But for the first time since this journey began, I wasn't thinking about what we might lose or how we might fail. I was thinking about what we might discover about ourselves, about the possibility that Charlie and I were exactly as good as Elena believed we were, and about the chance to prove that love, dedication, and hard work could create something worthy of recognition in any ring, judged by any standard, evaluated by anyone with eyes to see. The mixed breed competition at the Golden State Championship wasn't just an opportunity to win ribbons or titles. It was a chance to validate everything we'd built together, to stand up for every rescue dog who'd ever been dismissed because of their unknown heritage, and to demonstrate that worth came from within rather than from pedigree papers or breeding programs. Charlie shifted in his sleep, pressing closer against me with the unconscious trust of an animal who'd never doubted that we belonged together, that we were capable of great things, and that tomorrow would bring new opportunities for the partnership we'd built to shine. His confidence was contagious, and as I drifted off to sleep, I found myself believing in us again, with the kind of certainty that would carry us through whatever lay ahead. 10 days before the Golden State Championship, Elena called me with an unusual request. Instead of our regular training session at the OE Community Center, she wanted me to bring Charlie to her home, a sprawling ranch property in the hills outside Riverside that she'd converted into a private training facility decades ago. I'd heard other students mention Elena's place with a kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred sites, but I'd never been invited there myself. "There's something I want to show you," she said, her voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard before. "Something that might change how you think about what you and Charlie are capable of achieving." The drive to Elena's property took me through winding country roads lined with ancient oak trees and horse pastures, far from the suburban development where I lived. Her driveway was nearly a quarter-mile long, leading to a modest ranch house surrounded by professionally designed training areas that looked like something from a canine sports magazine. There were agility courses, rally rings, and open fields where dogs could run freely, but it was the building behind the main house that caught my attention. Elena emerged from the barn-like structure as I parked, followed by a distinguished-looking German shepherd who moved with the kind of effortless grace that spoke of exceptional breeding and training. This had to be one of Elena's personal dogs, and even from a distance I could see the quality that separated truly exceptional animals from merely good ones. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Kaiser," Elena said as we approached. "He's the reason I wanted you to come here today." Kaiser was magnificent in a way that made me understand why people became obsessed with perfect conformation. His coat was rich and lustrous, his movement was poetry in motion, and his intelligent dark eyes held the kind of steady confidence that came from a lifetime of success. But there was something else about him, something that reminded me of Charlie despite their obvious physical differences. "Kaiser was my foundation dog," Elena explained, running her hand along his perfectly sculpted head. "The animal who taught me that excellence isn't just about genetics or training or even talent. It's about the indefinable quality that makes some dogs transcendent while others remain merely competent." She led us into the building, which turned out to be part museum, part training center, and part shrine to the art of developing canine potential. The walls were lined with photographs, ribbons, trophies, and certificates documenting decades of success in every imaginable dog sport. But it wasn't the awards that took my breath away. It was the stories behind them, the evidence of Elena's gift for seeing potential where others saw limitations. "This is Magnus," she said, pointing to a photograph of a massive mixed breed who looked like a cross between a mastiff and something unidentifiable. "Found him at a kill shelter when he was 6 years old, considered unadoptable because of his size and lack of training. He became a therapy dog who worked with trauma victims for 8 years and saved more lives than most doctors." She moved to another section of the wall, where a smaller dog with distinctly mixed features grinned from beneath a collection of agility ribbons. "And this is Luna, Border Collie and Beagle mix who was returned to rescue 3 times because she was, quote, too energetic. She holds the regional speed record in 3 different agility divisions and retired undefeated in games competition." Each photograph told a similar story. Dogs who'd been discarded, overlooked, or written off by people who couldn't see past surface imperfections to recognize the potential beneath. Elena had built a reputation not just on her ability to train animals, but on her gift for identifying and developing excellence in unexpected places. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Because 28 years ago, I made a mistake," Elena said, her voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "I had a dog, a mixed-breed rescue not unlike Charlie, who possessed extraordinary potential. But I listened to people who told me he didn't belong in serious competition, that his unknown heritage would always limit his achievements. I kept him as a pet, gave him basic training, and convinced myself I was being realistic rather than cowardly." She walked to a corner of the building where a single photograph sat alone on a small table, surrounded by dried flowers and what looked like a worn leather collar. The dog in the picture was clearly a mixed breed, with the kind of intelligent eyes and alert expression that reminded me powerfully of Charlie. "This was Scout," Elena said softly. "The dog who taught me that my greatest failures wouldn't come from taking chances on unlikely candidates, but from failing to take chances at all. He died before I found the courage to let him show the world what he was capable of, and I've regretted that cowardice every day since." I stared at Scout's photograph, seeing in his face the same eager intelligence, the same readiness to work, the same indefinable quality that made some dogs special regardless of their breeding. The resemblance to Charlie wasn't physical, exactly, but there was something in the expression, in the way Scout seemed to be looking directly at the camera with absolute trust and anticipation. "I'm not going to let that happen again," Elena said firmly. "Not with Charlie, not with you. Which is why I brought you here today, to show you something that's going to change everything." She led me to a cabinet I hadn't noticed before, filled with leather-bound journals that looked like they'd been maintained for decades. Elena pulled out one of the older volumes and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "These are my training records," she explained. "Every dog I've worked with, every technique I've developed, every insight I've gained over 4 decades, of trying to understand what separates good dogs from great ones. The page she'd opened to was filled with detailed notes about a dog named Champion Riverside's Golden Dawn, a golden retriever who'd apparently achieved significant success in conformation showing during the 1990s. But it wasn't the dog's achievements that caught my attention. It was Elena's assessment of his abilities compared to other dogs she'd trained during the same period. Dawn was beautiful, Elena said, pointing to a photograph of the golden retriever that showed perfect breed type and obvious quality. Perfect conformation, excellent movement, ideal temperament for showing. He won consistently at the highest levels and was exactly what judges expected to see in his breed. She turned several pages to another entry, this one, about a dog named Ranger, who appeared to be some kind of herding breed mix. The notes were extensive, filled with observations about intelligence, trainability, and what Elena described as, quote, exceptional problem-solving ability. Ranger was everything Dawn wasn't, Elena continued. Mixed breeding, unknown background, unconventional appearance. But he was also smarter, more adaptable, and more emotionally intelligent than any purebred I'd worked with before or since. Dawn could perform a routine perfectly if nothing unexpected happened. Ranger could adjust to changing circumstances, read judges' preferences, and modify his behavior in real time to maximize his appeal. I was beginning to understand where this was leading, but Elena wasn't finished with her demonstration. She pulled out a more recent journal and opened it to a page I recognized immediately. Charlie's training records, the same notes she'd shown me the week before. Read this entry, she said, pointing to observations from our very first training session 2 years ago. Read what I wrote about Charlie after working with him for just 1 hour. I found the entry and read aloud. Exceptional focus and food motivation. Above average intelligence with strong problem-solving instincts. Natural desire to please combined with genuine enjoyment of work. Most interesting, intuitive understanding of handler's emotional state and ability to adjust energy level accordingly. This dog possesses rare emotional intelligence that could translate to exceptional ring presence under proper development. Looking up from the journal, I saw Elena watching me with the kind of intensity that suggested this moment was more important than I realized. That was after 1 hour, she emphasized. Before I knew about his background, before I understood his story, before I'd seen him work in challenging situations, I recognized something special in Charlie immediately, not despite his mixed heritage but because of the unique combination of traits that heritage had given him. She pulled out a thick folder I hadn't seen before, filled with what looked like video stills and detailed analysis sheets. Over the past 6 months, I've been documenting something I've never seen before in 20 years of serious competition training. Charlie doesn't just perform his routine. He reads the environment, adjusts to the judge's preferences, and modifies his presentation based on what's working in the moment. The video still showed Charlie in various training situations, but Elena had annotated them with observations that revealed a level of analysis I hadn't realized she was conducting. Notes about how Charlie's attention patterns changed based on environmental factors, how he adjusted his energy level to match different handlers during practice sessions, and how he seemed to understand not just what was expected but why it was expected. This is what separates good competition dogs from great ones, Elena explained, spreading the analysis sheets across a nearby table. Technical skill can be taught. Physical ability can be developed, but this kind of environmental awareness, this ability to think strategically while performing, this is something dogs are born with or they're not. And Charlie has it in abundance. I studied the documentation Elena had assembled, seeing Charlie's abilities laid out in scientific detail for the first time. The complexity of her analysis was overwhelming, but the conclusion was clear. Charlie possessed cognitive and emotional capabilities that were rare in any dog, regardless of breeding. There's something else, Elena said, pulling out one final folder that was marked with an official-looking seal I didn't recognize. Something I've never told you about my background, about why I retired from professional handling 15 years ago. The folder contained certificates and credentials that revealed Elena's true expertise. She wasn't just a talented local trainer, but a former AKC judge who'd evaluated thousands of dogs at the highest levels of competition, before stepping away from the judging world to focus on training and development. I was licensed to judge 6 breeds in the working and herding groups, Elena explained. I spent 12 years in the center of that ring, evaluating the best dogs in the country, learning to see past surface beauty to recognize the qualities that make truly exceptional animals. This revelation changed everything I thought I knew about Elena's qualifications to assess Charlie's potential. She wasn't just an experienced trainer with strong opinions. She was someone who'd stood where Patricia Wells would stand in 10 days. Someone who understood exactly what judges were looking for and how they made their decisions. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the implications of Elena's hidden expertise. "Because I wanted you to trust my assessment of Charlie based on his merits, not on my credentials," she replied. "But now, 10 days before the biggest test of your partnership, I want you to understand that when I tell you Charlie has what it takes to succeed at the highest levels, that opinion comes from someone who spent decades identifying and evaluating exceptional dogs." She pulled out a final document, one that made my hands shake when I recognized what it was: a detailed analysis of Charlie's conformation, movement, and temperament, written in the formal language of professional dog evaluation. Elena had been conducting an unofficial judging assessment of Charlie for months, documenting his strengths and potential weaknesses with the same rigor she'd once applied to champion-level purebreds. "Overall assessment," I read from the bottom of the document, my voice barely steady. "This animal demonstrates exceptional quality in temperament, intelligence, and athletic ability. Mixed heritage provides hybrid vigor rather than conformational weakness. Natural grace and confidence in movement. Superior trainability and handler focus. Recommendation: strong potential for success in mixed breed competition with proper presentation and handling." Looking up from the document, I saw Elena smiling with the kind of satisfaction that comes from sharing a secret that's been kept too long. "That's not just my opinion as your trainer," she said. "That's my professional assessment, as someone who's judged thousands of dogs and knows what quality looks like, regardless of pedigree. Charlie isn't just good enough to compete at the Golden State Championship. He's good enough to win." The weight of this revelation was almost too much to process. For 2 years, I'd been training with someone whose expertise went far beyond what I had imagined. Someone who'd been evaluating Charlie with the same professional standards applied to the most expensive and carefully bred dogs in the country. And her conclusion was that Charlie didn't just belong in serious competition, but had the potential to excel at it. "There's one more thing I want to show you," Elena said, leading me to another section of the building where professional grooming equipment was set up alongside what looked like a photography studio. "Something that's going to give you an advantage that Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton never saw coming." She gestured for me to bring Charlie forward, and I watched as she began demonstrating grooming techniques I'd never seen before. Not just basic brushing and cleaning, but specialized methods for enhancing natural coat texture, techniques for highlighting good conformation points, and subtle styling approaches that brought out Charlie's best features without looking artificial or overdone. "Most people think grooming is just about making dogs look clean and neat," Elena explained as she worked with Charlie's coat, somehow making it appear thicker and more lustrous without using any products I could identify. "But at the championship level, grooming is an art form that can make the difference between placing and winning." As she worked, Charlie's appearance began to transform in ways that seemed almost magical. His mixed coat, which I'd always considered pleasantly scruffy, began to look sophisticated and purposeful. His body structure, which I'd known was good but not remarkable, suddenly appeared to have excellent proportion and balance. Most dramatically, his expression seemed to gain intensity and focus, as if Elena's grooming techniques were bringing out personality traits that had been hidden beneath casual everyday presentation. "The secret isn't changing what's there," Elena explained, stepping back to let me see the full effect of her work. "It's presenting what's already there to maximum advantage. Charlie has excellent bone structure, beautiful eye color, and natural charisma. Most people just don't know how to help him show those qualities." Looking at Charlie after Elena's demonstration, I hardly recognized my own dog. Not because he looked fake or artificial, but because he looked like the best possible version of himself. Like a professional photograph that captures someone at their most attractive moment, Elena had somehow helped Charlie project all his best qualities simultaneously. "This is what Charlie will look like in the ring," Elena said with obvious satisfaction. "This is what Judge Wells is going to see when you walk into that ring next Saturday." But the grooming transformation was just the beginning of Elena's surprises. She led me to another area where she'd set up a video camera and professional lighting, explaining that she wanted to record our final training session so we could analyze our performance with the same objectivity a judge would bring to the evaluation. "Judges see dozens of dogs every day," Elena explained as she adjusted the camera angle. "They develop a mental template for what quality looks like, and they make decisions quickly based on first impressions and overall impact. This recording will let us see ourselves exactly as Judge Wells will see us." We ran through our entire routine 3 times under the lights, with Elena calling out corrections and encouragement just as she had hundreds of times before. But watching ourselves on the playback was a revelation that exceeded even the grooming demonstration. Charlie and I looked like serious competitors, moving with precision and confidence that I hadn't realized we'd developed. "Look at Charlie's expression here," Elena said, pausing the video at a moment during our free stacking exercise. "See how he's focused on you but also aware of his surroundings? That's the kind of intelligent attention that judges love to see. It shows a dog who's engaged with his work, but not anxious or overwhelmed." She fast-forwarded to our gating sequence, where Charlie's movement looked fluid and powerful despite his smaller size. "And here, watch how naturally he adjusts his stride to match your pace." Most dogs have to be trained extensively to maintain proper position during gating, but Charlie does it instinctively because he's so tuned into your body language. The most striking moment came during the examination portion of our routine, where Charlie stood perfectly still while Elena played the role of judge, running her hands over his body structure and checking his bite and expression. On camera, Charlie's cooperation looked effortless and confident, the behavior of a dog who understood and enjoyed the process rather than merely tolerating it. "This is what 20 years of judging experience tells me," Elena said as the video ended. "Charlie has the 3 qualities that separate winners from participants: natural ability, proper preparation, and that indefinable presence that makes judges want to keep looking at a dog even after they've completed their examination." As if to prove Elena's point, Charlie had been watching the playback with obvious interest, his head tilted in the characteristic way that indicated he was processing new information. When Elena pointed the camera at him again, he immediately moved into a perfect stack without any command from me, as if he'd understood that this was his moment to demonstrate what he'd learned. "He knows," Elena said with amazement. "He actually understands that this is about him, that the camera and the lights and the formal presentation are connected to his work with you. That level of cognitive awareness is extraordinary." The session concluded with Elena presenting me with a training manual she'd compiled specifically for Charlie and me, a detailed guide that covered everything from ring strategy to handling techniques to grooming protocols. But more than the technical information, the manual represented Elena's complete confidence in our potential for success. "I've never put this much documentation together for a student," she admitted, as I flipped through pages of analysis, tips, and encouragement. "But I've also never had a student with this much natural potential facing this level of opportunity. Everything you need to know is in there, but more importantly, everything Charlie needs to succeed is already inside him." Driving home that evening with Charlie sleeping peacefully in the back seat and Elena's manual on the passenger seat beside me, I felt a fundamental shift in how I thought about the upcoming competition. This wasn't just about proving that rescue dogs could compete, or showing Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton that they'd underestimated us. This was about Charlie finally getting the chance to demonstrate abilities that had been developing quietly for 2 years, watched and documented by someone whose professional expertise I was only beginning to understand. The hidden advantage Elena had revealed wasn't just her secret background as a former judge, or her sophisticated training methods, or even her detailed analysis of Charlie's exceptional qualities. The real advantage was the complete transformation of my understanding of what Charlie and I were capable of achieving together. For the first time since I'd mailed our entry form to the Golden State Championship, I wasn't thinking about whether we belonged in that ring. I was thinking about what would happen when Judge Patricia Wells saw what Elena had been seeing all along. A dog whose mixed heritage had given him advantages rather than limitations, whose intelligence and trainability exceeded most purebreds, and whose partnership with his handler represented the kind of teamwork that made competition exciting to watch. Victoria Sterling could keep her perfectly bred golden retriever, with his championship bloodlines and professional handling. Richard Pemberton could continue believing that pedigree papers were more important than actual ability. In 9 days, Charlie and I would walk into that ring carrying 2 years of preparation, Elena's hidden expertise, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing we weren't just hoping to compete. We were expecting to win. The morning of the Golden State Championship arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes everything seem sharper and more significant than usual. I'd been awake since 4:30, not from nerves but from an electric anticipation that had been building for days. Charlie seemed to sense the importance of the day, and had positioned himself by the front door before I'd even finished my coffee, his travel bag already packed with grooming supplies, treats, and the lucky bandana Elena had given us during our final training session. The drive to the Los Angeles Convention Center took 2 hours through Saturday morning traffic that seemed designed to test every meditation technique I'd ever learned. Charlie rode in his familiar travel crate, occasionally offering soft whimpers of excitement when we passed other vehicles clearly headed to the same destination, their bumper stickers and car decorations advertising various kennel clubs and breed associations. As we approached the convention center, the scope of the Golden State Championship became apparent in ways that no amount of mental preparation could have anticipated. The parking lots were filled with RVs, grooming trailers, and vehicles modified specifically for transporting show dogs. Professional handlers moved between setups with the kind of efficient purpose that spoke of decades of experience, while owners in crisp white shirts and comfortable shoes walked dogs of every conceivable breed and size. The check-in process was smoother than I'd expected, partly because Elena had coached me on the procedures, but mostly because the event staff seemed genuinely pleased to see mixed-breed entries. Our ring assignments were clearly marked, our judging schedule was detailed and professional, and the volunteer who handed me our competitor number smiled with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm about the day ahead. "First time at Golden State?" she asked, noticing what must have been obvious nervousness despite my attempts to project confidence. "First time anywhere this large," I admitted, looking around the massive space that was rapidly filling with grooming tables, exercise pens, and the controlled chaos of serious dog competition. "Mixed breed?" she asked, glancing at Charlie, who was taking in the overwhelming sensory experience with alert interest rather than anxiety. "Yes, and probably the most optimistic entry in the building," I replied, trying to match her friendly tone while internally marveling at Charlie's calm demeanor despite the noise and activity surrounding us. "Don't be so sure about that," she said with a knowing smile. "Some of the best dogs I've seen over the years have been the ones nobody expected to succeed. Good luck today." Finding our assigned grooming area proved to be an adventure in navigation through what felt like a small city dedicated entirely to canine excellence. The scale was intimidating, but Charlie trotted beside me with the kind of confident curiosity that suggested he found the environment interesting rather than overwhelming. His resilience continued to amaze me, and I realized that his early experiences with uncertainty and change had actually prepared him well for exactly this kind of challenging situation. Our grooming space was in what the program called the all-breed section, which turned out to be a euphemism for everything that isn't a specialty breed show. But rather than feeling relegated to a lesser area, I found myself surrounded by some of the most interesting dogs and handlers in the building. There were rare breeds I'd never seen before, rescue dogs with fascinating backstories, and handlers whose obvious expertise suggested that serious competition wasn't limited to traditional purebred entries. The woman at the grooming table next to ours introduced herself as Janet Michaels, a professional handler who specialized in what she called underdog breeds, dogs whose rarity or unconventional appearance often put them at a disadvantage in traditional competition, but whose quality was undeniable to experienced eyes. "That's a beautiful dog," she said, watching Charlie settle into his travel crate while I organized our supplies according to Elena's detailed preparation checklist. "Mixed breed?" "Rescue from Highway 91, I replied, beginning the grooming routine that Elena had practiced with us dozens of times. "German Shepherd, Border Collie, and what the vet diplomatically calls, quote, various other influences." Janet laughed with the kind of appreciation that suggested she'd heard similar descriptions before. "Those, quote, various other influences often produce the most interesting dogs. I've been handling for 15 years, and some of my most memorable wins have come from dogs whose breeding was more adventure than intention." As I worked through Charlie's grooming routine, I became aware that our setup was attracting attention from other handlers and spectators. Not the dismissive kind of attention I'd feared, but genuine interest in what Elena's techniques were revealing about Charlie's natural qualities. The specialized grooming methods she'd taught me were bringing out coat texture and body structure that apparently impressed people who knew what to look for. "Excuse me," said a woman I recognized as one of the professional photographers documenting the event. "Would you mind if I took some shots of your grooming process? I'm putting together a feature on innovative preparation techniques, and what you're doing with coat presentation is really sophisticated." The request was flattering but also nerve-wracking, since it meant our preparation was being noticed by people whose opinions carried weight in the dog show community. But Charlie seemed to enjoy the attention, posing naturally for the photographer while I continued working on his presentation. It was during this impromptu photo session that I first spotted Victoria Sterling across the grooming area, her golden retriever Duke positioned on a professional grooming table that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was dressed in what looked like designer show clothes, and her entire setup screamed expensive expertise and championship expectations. Victoria noticed me at almost the same moment, and I watched her expression shift from casual scanning of the competition to focused assessment of what Charlie and I represented. She said something to the professional handler working on Duke's presentation, and both women looked in our direction with the kind of evaluative attention that suggested they were trying to determine whether we posed any kind of threat to their anticipated success. "Looks like you've got some serious competition checking you out," Janet observed, following my gaze toward Victoria's elaborate setup. "That's Sterling Kennels, right? Big money operation with a reputation for buying their way to wins rather than developing their own dogs." I was surprised by the criticism, since Victoria's reputation in our local community was generally positive, if intimidating. But Janet's perspective came from the professional handling world, where reputation was based on long-term success rather than immediate wealth or social status. "Sterling's got quality dogs," Janet continued, "but they've never had to develop anything from scratch. They buy finished champions and hire handlers to maintain their winning streaks. Very different skill set from what you're doing with a dog like Charlie." The distinction she was drawing became clearer as I watched Victoria's preparation routine. Everything was professional and efficient, but it was also entirely predictable. Duke was a beautiful dog being presented in exactly the way golden retrievers had been presented for decades, with no innovation or individual adaptation to his specific qualities. By contrast, Elena's grooming techniques were bringing out characteristics in Charlie that were unique to his particular combination of breeds and physical attributes. We weren't trying to make him look like something he wasn't, but rather helping him become the most compelling version of himself possible. The mixed breed judging was scheduled for 2 o'clock, which gave us time to watch some of the other competitions and get a feel for the judging style of Patricia Wells. Elena had assured me that Judge Wells was fair and knowledgeable, but seeing her work with other dogs would help me understand her preferences and approach. The sporting group judging provided an excellent opportunity to observe Judge Wells in action, since it included golden retrievers and other breeds similar enough to Charlie's mix that her evaluation methods would be relevant to our own performance. What I saw was both encouraging and educational. Judge Wells clearly knew dogs in a way that went beyond superficial breed knowledge. She spent time with each animal, evaluating not just physical structure but temperament, movement, and what Elena had taught me to recognize as presence, that indefinable quality that made some dogs compelling to watch even when they were standing still. More importantly, Judge Wells seemed to genuinely enjoy her work. She smiled frequently, spoke encouragingly to nervous handlers, and took time to appreciate each dog's individual qualities rather than rushing through a mechanical evaluation process. When she awarded placements, her choices reflected a sophisticated understanding of what made each animal special within their breed context. Watching Duke compete in the sporting group, I was struck by how perfectly he embodied everything people expected from a champion golden retriever. His movement was textbook correct, his coat was lustrous and properly presented, and his temperament was exactly what the breed standard described. But there was also something slightly predictable about his performance, as if he were executing a routine rather than expressing his individual personality. Duke placed second in his class, a respectable showing that clearly satisfied Victoria but fell short of the commanding victory she'd probably expected. More interestingly, the dog who beat him was a less obviously perfect golden retriever, whose handler had managed to showcase personality and enthusiasm that made his performance more engaging to watch. "See that?" Janet said, having watched the same competition from her vantage point near our grooming area. "Wells isn't just looking for technical correctness. She wants to see dogs who bring something special to the ring, who make her enjoy the evaluation process." This observation aligned perfectly with Elena's coaching about Charlie's natural charisma and intelligence. If Judge Wells appreciated dogs who brought personality and engagement to their performance, Charlie's natural curiosity and responsiveness to new situations could actually work in our favor rather than against us. As our judging time approached, I began the final preparation routine Elena had drilled into us during our training sessions. Charlie seemed to understand that this was the culmination of everything we'd been working toward, and his focus sharpened in a way that reminded me of Elena's observations about his exceptional environmental awareness. The walk to Ring 7, where mixed breed judging would take place, felt simultaneously endless and instantaneous. Charlie moved beside me with the kind of confident stride that suggested he was ready for whatever came next, while I fought to maintain the calm composure Elena had insisted was crucial for effective handling. The ring itself was smaller than I'd expected, but set up with professional attention to detail that made it clear this wasn't a casual or secondary competition. Judge Wells was already in position, reviewing her judging book and observing the handlers as they entered the ring with their dogs. There were 12 mixed breeds entered in our division, representing a fascinating variety of size, appearance, and apparent breed combinations. Some looked like obvious crosses between recognizable breeds, while others reflected the kind of complex genetic mixing that produced truly unique individuals. What struck me immediately was that every dog looked well-prepared and well-loved, suggesting that the mixed breed community took competition seriously despite the casual attitudes I'd encountered from people like Victoria Sterling. Judge Wells called us into the ring with a warm smile and clear instructions about the order of evaluation. Charlie and I were positioned fourth in the lineup, which Elena had told me was actually advantageous, since it allowed time to observe the judging pattern while avoiding the pressure of going first or the anticlimactic feeling of being last. Watching the first 3 dogs being evaluated, I was struck by how differently Judge Wells approached mixed breed judging compared to what I had observed during the purebred competitions. Rather than checking each dog against a specific breed standard, she seemed to be evaluating overall balance, movement quality, and temperament in ways that recognized the unique combination of traits each mixed breed brought to the ring. The first dog, a large shepherd mix with obvious intelligence and excellent structure, moved beautifully but seemed slightly overwhelmed by the ring environment. Judge Wells spent extra time with him, clearly trying to help him relax and show his best qualities, but his nervousness affected his performance, despite his obvious physical gifts. The second dog, a smaller terrier mix with abundant personality, captured Judge Wells' attention immediately with his confident demeanor and enthusiastic response to examination. His structure wasn't perfect by any purebred standard, but his charisma and obvious enjoyment of the ring experience made him compelling to watch. The third dog, a medium-sized hound mix with beautiful movement and calm temperament, represented exactly the kind of steady, reliable quality that often succeeded in mixed-breed competition. He performed his routine flawlessly without being particularly exciting, the canine equivalent of a perfectly executed but uninspiring performance. Then Judge Wells called Charlie and me to the center of the ring for our individual examination, and everything Elena had prepared us for began to matter in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Charlie moved into his stacking position, with the kind of natural grace that made the complex training behind it invisible, while I positioned myself to present him at optimal advantage without appearing to overhandle or manipulate his posture. Judge Wells approached with the kind of professional focus that suggested she was genuinely interested in understanding what Charlie had to offer. Her hands-on examination was thorough but gentle, checking his structure, coat texture, and bite, while observing his reaction to handling by a stranger. Charlie's response exceeded even Elena's optimistic predictions. Instead of merely tolerating the examination, he seemed genuinely interested in the process, maintaining alert attention while staying perfectly still. When Judge Wells checked his expression and eye contact, Charlie looked directly at her with the kind of intelligent engagement that suggested he understood this was an important interaction. "Nice temperament," Judge Wells murmured, loud enough for me to hear but soft enough to maintain the formal atmosphere of the ring. "Very steady." The gating portion of our evaluation showcased everything Elena and I had worked to develop over months of preparation. Charlie's movement was smooth and purposeful. His attention remained focused on me despite the distractions of the ring environment, and his natural adjustment to my pace made our partnership look effortless. But it was during the free stacking exercise that Charlie demonstrated the exceptional quality Elena had been documenting in her training notes. Instead of simply maintaining the position I'd placed him in, he made subtle adjustments that improved his presentation while keeping his attention engaged with both Judge Wells and me simultaneously. "Beautiful self-presentation," Judge Wells said, making a note that I hoped was positive while trying to maintain my composed expression despite the excitement building in my chest. After our individual examination, we returned to the lineup while Judge Wells evaluated the remaining dogs in our class. I used the waiting time to observe her interaction with each animal, trying to understand her priorities and preferences based on where she spent the most time and attention. What became clear was that Judge Wells valued the same qualities Elena had identified as Charlie's primary strengths: intelligence, adaptability, and the kind of confident temperament that made a dog enjoyable to evaluate. The dogs who captured her attention longest were those who brought personality and engagement to their performance, rather than simply executing technical requirements. When all individual examinations were complete, Judge Wells asked us to gate around the ring as a group, providing her with a final opportunity to compare our dog's movement and overall presence. This was the moment Elena had identified as potentially decisive, since it allowed Charlie's natural grace and athletic ability to be seen in direct comparison with the other competitors. Charlie seemed to understand the importance of this final presentation and moved with the kind of fluid confidence that made his mixed heritage look like an advantage rather than a limitation. His size allowed him to cover ground efficiently without appearing rushed, while his intelligence kept him perfectly positioned relative to both me and the other dogs in the ring. Judge Wells watched this group gating with obvious attention, making notes and occasionally asking handlers to adjust their position or speed to get a better view of particular dogs. When she asked Charlie and me to move to the front of the line, I felt my heart rate spike with the possibility that we were being seriously considered for placement. The final moments of judging involved Judge Wells walking the length of our lineup one more time, taking a long look at each dog before returning to her judging table to make her final decisions. The wait felt eternal, but Charlie remained perfectly composed beside me, occasionally glancing up with the kind of trusting expression that reminded me why we'd come this far together. "I'd like the German Shepherd mix to step forward," Judge Wells announced, and for a moment I wasn't sure if she meant Charlie or another dog whose heritage included Shepherd breeding. But then she was looking directly at me, smiling with the kind of genuine pleasure that suggested her decision had been easy rather than difficult. Charlie and I stepped forward to the center of the ring, and I heard Judge Wells speak the words that would change everything. "Best in breed, mixed breed division." The announcement hit me like a physical force, and for a moment I wondered if I'd misheard or misunderstood what was happening. But then Judge Wells was shaking my hand and handing me a purple and gold ribbon that read "Best in breed" in elegant script, while Charlie accepted her congratulations with the kind of dignified pleasure that suggested he'd known all along this moment would come. The applause from ringside was immediate and enthusiastic, but what struck me most was the genuine warmth of the congratulations from other handlers in our class. The mixed-breed community, it seemed, celebrated each other's successes rather than treating them as personal defeats. As we posed for the official photographs that would document Charlie's Victory, I caught sight of Victoria Sterling standing at ringside with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of bewildered reassessment that suggested she was trying to understand how the dog she'd dismissed as unworthy of serious competition had just achieved exactly the kind of success she'd assumed was reserved for expensive purebreds. Richard Pemberton was there too, his face reflecting the kind of shocked silence that comes from witnessing something that challenges fundamental beliefs about how the world works. The mixed breed rescue they'd written off as a charity case had just been crowned best in breed by a judge whose expertise they couldn't question or dismiss. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Wells approached us after the official ceremonies were complete, her expression reflecting genuine enthusiasm about Charlie's performance. "That's a very special dog you have there," she said, reaching down to scratch Charlie behind the ears, in the way that indicated she'd genuinely enjoyed evaluating him. "Exceptional temperament, beautiful movement, and that kind of intelligent engagement that makes judging a pleasure rather than work." She paused, looking at Charlie with the kind of professional assessment that suggested she was seeing qualities that went beyond our specific performance. "I've been judging for 30 years, she continued, "and I can tell you that what you two demonstrated in there today is exactly what this sport should be about. Quality, preparation, and partnership that brings out the best in both dog and handler." As we made our way back to the grooming area, Charlie carrying himself with the kind of quiet pride that suggested he understood the significance of what had just happened, I realized that Elena's hidden advantage had proven to be everything she'd promised and more. Not just her expertise or Charlie's exceptional abilities, but the complete transformation of our understanding of what we were capable of achieving together. The victory itself was sweet, but the validation was even sweeter. We hadn't just won a ribbon or a title. We'd proven that worth couldn't be measured by bloodlines or breeding papers, that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely places, and that partnership built on love and dedication could overcome any prejudice about what belonged in the ring. Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton had dismissed us as pretenders who didn't understand our place in their carefully ordered world. Instead, we'd shown them that their world was bigger and more inclusive than they'd realized, and that sometimes the most profound victories came from the most unexpected sources. Charlie seemed to sense the magnitude of our achievement and pressed closer against my leg as we walked, his trust and partnership unchanged by the ribbon in my hand but somehow deepened by the knowledge that we'd faced our biggest test together and emerged not just successful, but triumphant. The aftermath of our best-in-breed victory felt surreal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Within minutes of Judge Wells' announcement, our grooming area had transformed into an impromptu celebration space, with competitors from other classes stopping by to offer congratulations and ask about Charlie's background. The mixed breed community, it turned out, was tight-knit and genuinely supportive of each other's achievements, in ways that felt refreshingly different from the competitive tensions I'd observed in some of the purebred rings. Janet Michaels was among the first to reach us, her professional handler's eye clearly appreciating the significance of what had just occurred. "That was beautiful ring work," she said, her praise carrying the weight of someone who'd seen thousands of dogs compete over the years. "Your boy moved like he owned that ring," and the judge's response was immediate. You could see her light up when she started evaluating him. The photographer who documented our grooming process earlier approached with renewed interest, explaining that our victory had transformed her feature story from a piece about preparation techniques into something much more significant. "This is exactly the kind of story the dog world needs to hear," she said, adjusting her camera settings while Charlie posed naturally for additional shots. "A rescue dog with unknown breeding defeating preconceptions through pure merit and exceptional preparation." But it was the reaction from spectators and other exhibitors that truly drove home the impact of our achievement. People who'd never seen us before were approaching with genuine curiosity about Charlie's story, his training background, and what it meant for mixed-breed dogs in competition. The questions were respectful and interested, rather than skeptical, suggesting that our performance had shifted perceptions about what rescue dogs were capable of achieving. "Excuse me," said an elderly gentleman whose grooming setup suggested decades of involvement in purebred competition. "I watched your dog's examination from ringside, and I have to tell you, That was some of the most beautiful ring presence I've seen in years. The way he engaged with the judge while maintaining perfect composure, that's the mark of a truly exceptional animal. He introduced himself as Dr. Franklin Morrison, a retired veterinarian and former AKC board member whose opinion carried considerable weight in the dog show community. His assessment of Charlie's performance was particularly meaningful because it came from someone whose expertise was beyond question and whose involvement in purebred competition spanned multiple decades. "I've been involved in this sport for 45 years," Dr. Morrison continued, "and I can tell you that what your dog demonstrated today is exactly what confirmation judging should be evaluating. Not just adherence to breed standards, but overall quality, temperament, and that indefinable presence that makes some animals truly special." As word of our victory spread through the convention center, I began to understand that Charlie's achievement represented something larger than just one dog's success in one competition. We'd become a symbol of possibility for everyone who'd ever been told their animal wasn't good enough, wasn't bred correctly, or didn't belong in serious competition. The most poignant moment came when a young girl, probably around 12 years old, approached with her mother and a small mixed breed who clearly bore the scars of a difficult past. The dog was missing one eye and walked with a slight limp, but his tail wagged constantly and his expression radiated the kind of joy that comes from being loved despite imperfections. "Is it true that your dog was a rescue?" the girl asked, her voice carrying the kind of hope that suggested this information was personally important to her. "Absolutely," I replied, kneeling down to Charlie's level so she could see him more clearly. "Found him on a highway when he was 3 months old, sick and scared, and with no one looking for him." "Could Buddy ever do something like this?" she asked, gesturing toward her own dog who was clearly eager to make friends despite his physical limitations. "With enough training and dedication, any dog can surprise you," I said, meaning every word. "The most important thing is the relationship between you and your dog, and the willingness to work together toward whatever goals make sense for your partnership." Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she thanked me for taking the time to encourage her daughter's dreams. Later, I would learn that Buddy had been rescued from a fighting operation and was considered damaged goods by most people who encountered him. But watching the bond between the girl and her dog, I recognized the same kind of partnership that Charlie and I had built, the same potential for extraordinary achievement that others might overlook or dismiss. The official award ceremony took place in the main ring, where best-in-breed winners from all divisions were recognized before the crowd that had gathered for the championship's closing activities. Walking into that ring with Charlie, carrying the purple and gold ribbon that proclaimed his victory, felt like stepping into a dream I hadn't dared to fully imagine. The announcer's voice echoed through the convention center as he introduced each winner. Best in breed, mixed breed division, Charlie, owned and handled by Sarah Martinez of Riverside, California. The applause was warm and sustained, but what struck me most was seeing Elena in the stands, her face radiant with the kind of pride that suggested this moment was as meaningful for her as it was for us. After the ceremony, Elena made her way to ringside with tears in her eyes and a smile that could have powered the entire convention center. She'd been watching from the grooming area during our actual competition, respecting the tradition that trainers should allow their students to compete independently, but she'd clearly seen enough to understand the magnitude of what Charlie had achieved. "I knew," she said simply, wrapping both Charlie and me in a hug that felt like validation for 2 years of work and worry and hope. From that very first training session, I knew this dog had something special. But watching him work today, seeing him rise to the occasion with such confidence and grace, that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video she'd taken of our final gating exercise, the moment when Judge Wells had asked us to move to the front of the line. "Look at Charlie's expression here," she said, pausing the video at a moment when Charlie was looking directly at the judge with perfect attention. He's not just performing a routine, he's communicating, engaging, showing her who he is as an individual. That's what separates good dogs from great ones. The video revealed something I hadn't been aware of during the actual competition: Charlie's obvious enjoyment of the entire process. His tail wasn't wagging frantically, but it was carried high with confidence. His ears were alert and forward, indicating interest rather than anxiety. Most tellingly, his eyes were bright and focused, showing the kind of intelligent engagement that judges loved to see. "This is going to change things," Elena said, her voice carrying a certainty that made me realize she understood implications I was only beginning to grasp. "Not just for you and Charlie, but for mixed breed competition in general. When a rescue dog wins Best in Breed at a championship-level show, it sends a message that quality comes from preparation and partnership, not from pedigree papers." As we prepared to leave the convention center, loading our equipment and carefully packing Charlie's ribbon and trophy, I became aware of lingering attention from other exhibitors. Some were clearly reassessing their assumptions about mixed-breed competition, while others seemed to be evaluating their own dog's potential with new eyes. The most significant encounter came as we were walking toward the exit, when Victoria Sterling approached with Duke at her side. Her expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in her demeanor that suggested genuine uncertainty about how to process what she'd witnessed. "Congratulations," she said, her voice lacking the condescending tone I'd come to expect from our interactions. "That was quite a performance." "Thank you," I replied, unsure whether this was genuine acknowledgement or some kind of social obligation she felt compelled to fulfill. "I have to ask," Victoria continued, "how long have you been working with Elena Rodriguez?" The question surprised me, both because it suggested Victoria knew about Elena's background, and because it indicated she was trying to understand the source of our success rather than dismissing it as luck or accident. 2 years, I answered honestly. She's been incredible, not just as a trainer but as someone who saw potential in Charlie when others might have written him off. Victoria nodded slowly, as if processing information that didn't align with her pre-existing beliefs about how the dog world worked. "Elena has quite a reputation among people who know the sport's history. I didn't realize she was still taking students." There was something in her tone that suggested respect for Elena's expertise, even if she was struggling to reconcile that respect with her assumptions about mixed-breed dogs and their place in serious competition. "Charlie's a very nice dog," Victoria added, reaching down to let Charlie sniff her hand. Duke, meanwhile, showed polite interest in Charlie without any of the territorial behavior that sometimes occurred between competing animals. "He's taught me a lot about looking beyond the obvious," I replied, choosing my words carefully but honestly. "Sometimes the most extraordinary dogs come from the most ordinary circumstances." Victoria studied Charlie with the kind of professional assessment I'd seen her apply to dogs at training matches and fun shows. For a moment, I wondered if she was finally seeing what Elena and Judge Wells had recognized immediately: the intelligence, the athletic ability, and the indefinable presence that made Charlie special, regardless of his mixed heritage. "Well," she said finally, "perhaps I've been too narrow in my thinking about what belongs in serious competition. Today certainly gave me something to consider." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement that her dismissive attitude at Sunset Hills Dog Park had been premature and possibly unfair. More importantly, it suggested that Charlie's victory had accomplished something beyond our personal satisfaction. It had challenged assumptions and opened minds in ways that might benefit other mixed-breed dogs and their handlers. Richard Pemberton was notably absent from these post-competition interactions, though I spotted him near the parking area loading his German Shepherds with what appeared to be considerable haste. His avoidance was probably wise, since any attempt at conversation would have required him to acknowledge that everything he'd said about Charlie's unsuitability for serious competition had been proven wrong in the most public way possible. The drive home felt different from the morning's nervous anticipation. Charlie slept peacefully in his travel crate, occasionally stirring to check our progress but clearly content with whatever dreams were occupying his post-victory rest. The purple and gold ribbon sat on the passenger seat beside me, tangible proof that the day's events had actually occurred rather than being some elaborate fantasy. But more than the ribbon or the trophy or even the satisfaction of proving our critics wrong, what struck me most was how little our fundamental relationship had changed. Charlie was still the same loyal, intelligent, loving companion he'd been that morning. I was still the veterinary assistant who'd fallen in love with a highway rescue. What had changed was other people's perception of what we were capable of achieving together. My phone had been buzzing with messages throughout the drive, And when I finally checked them at a rest stop, I discovered that news of our victory was already spreading through social media and online dog communities. The photographer's images had been posted to the Golden State Championship's official accounts, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Marcus had sent a series of increasingly excited texts as updates about our performance reached him through the dog show community's informal communication networks. Dr. Collins from the veterinary clinic had forwarded messages from other animal professionals who'd heard about Charlie's achievement and wanted to offer congratulations. Even some of our training classmates from Elena's group sessions had reached out with enthusiasm and encouragement. But the message that meant the most came from Elena herself, sent just as we'd been leaving the convention center. "You trusted the process, believed in Charlie's potential, and gave him the opportunity to show the world what I've been seeing for 2 years. Today wasn't just about winning a ribbon. It was about proving that excellence can emerge from anywhere, when it's recognized, nurtured, and given the chance to flourish." Arriving home that evening felt like returning to familiar territory after an expedition to a foreign country. My small apartment looked exactly the same, but I felt fundamentally changed by the day's experiences. Charlie settled into his favorite spot on the couch with obvious relief, clearly happy to be back in his familiar environment despite the excitement of our championship adventure. I placed his ribbon and trophy on the bookshelf that already held his previous achievements, but they looked different now, more significant, as if his best-in-breed victory had retroactively validated everything we'd accomplished together over the past 2 years. Each smaller ribbon and certificate represented steps on a journey that had led to this moment, proof that sustainable success was built through consistent effort, rather than achieved through sudden breakthrough. The next few days brought unexpected attention from the broader dog community. The story of Charlie's victory was picked up by several canine publications, both online and in print, with particular emphasis on what his achievement meant for rescue dogs and mixed-breed competition. The coverage was uniformly positive, but more importantly, it was thoughtful and substantive, rather than merely feel-good fluff. One article, written by a longtime dog show columnist, placed Charlie's victory in the context of evolving attitudes toward mixed-breed competition and the growing recognition that genetic diversity often produced healthier, more adaptable animals than intensive line breeding. Another piece focused on the training methods Elena had developed, positioning her approach as an example of how traditional dog sports could evolve to be more inclusive while maintaining high standards of excellence. The most meaningful coverage came from a rescue organization newsletter that featured Charlie's story as an example of what was possible when shelter dogs were given opportunities to develop their potential. The article included information about other rescue dogs who'd achieved success in various canine sports, creating a narrative about possibility rather than just celebrating one individual achievement. But the real impact of our victory became apparent during our next visit to Sunset Hills Dog Park, the same location where Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton had questioned Charlie's worthiness just a month earlier. The response from other dog owners was immediate and overwhelmingly positive, with people approaching to congratulate us and ask about Charlie's training background. More significantly, several owners of mixed-breed dogs expressed interest in exploring competition opportunities for their own animals. The barrier that had seemed so insurmountable a month ago, the sense that serious dog sports were reserved for purebreds with championship bloodlines, had been breached in ways that made possibility visible to people who'd never considered it before. Janet Morrison, the border collie owner who'd agreed with Victoria's dismissive assessment of Charlie's prospects, approached with obvious embarrassment about her previous stance. "I owe you an apology," she said sincerely. "I let other people's opinions influence my judgment instead of looking at what was right in front of me. Charlie's always been special, and I should have recognized that." Her border collie and Charlie greeted each other with the easy familiarity of old friends, completely unconcerned with questions of breeding or competition worthiness. Their interaction served as a reminder that dogs themselves never shared the prejudices that humans sometimes imposed on them. Elena's training classes experienced a surge of interest from mixed-breed owners who'd been inspired by Charlie's success to explore their own dog's potential. She began offering specialized sessions for rescue dogs and their handlers, focusing on building confidence and developing individual strengths, rather than trying to fit diverse animals into standardized molds. What Charlie accomplished opened doors for so many other dogs, Elena explained during one of our private sessions. Several weeks after the championship. But more than that, it proved that my training philosophy was correct. Every dog has potential, and the trainer's job is to help them discover and develop it rather than limiting them based on preconceived notions about what they should be able to achieve. The ripple effects of our victory extended beyond the local dog community into my professional life as well. Dr. Collins began referring clients with behavioral or training questions to me, recognizing that my experience with Charlie had given me insights that went beyond basic animal care. The clinic started hosting educational seminars about canine potential and positive training methods, with Charlie serving as a living example of what was possible through patience and proper technique. Most rewarding was the impact on other rescue operations in the area. Several shelters began implementing more sophisticated evaluation and training programs for their dogs, recognizing that animals with competition potential might find homes more easily if their abilities were properly showcased. Charlie's story became part of their adoption narratives, helping potential families see rescue dogs as individuals with unique gifts rather than just pets needing homes. The Golden State Championship had been scheduled as a one-time achievement, the culmination of everything Charlie and I had worked toward together. But our success opened invitations to other competitions, opportunities to demonstrate that our victory hadn't been a fluke or accident. Elena encouraged us to continue competing, not just for additional wins but to maintain visibility for mixed-breed excellence in the dog sports community. Over the following year, Charlie and I competed in championships across California and neighboring states, consistently placing well and occasionally winning. But more important than our individual achievements was the growing presence of other mixed-breed teams at these events, many of them inspired by Charlie's initial breakthrough to explore their own potential. The most gratifying moment came at a championship in Arizona, where I watched a young handler accept a best-in-breed ribbon with her rescued pit bull mix, a dog who'd been labeled unadoptable due to breed prejudice and behavioral challenges. Her tears of joy and the obvious pride of her dog reminded me of our own first victory, and the validation that came from proving doubters wrong through excellence rather than argument. Charlie, now 4 years old and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a proven champion, had become something of a celebrity in the mixed-breed competition community. But fame hadn't changed his fundamental nature. He remained the same loving, intelligent, eager-to-please dog who'd captured my heart in a veterinary clinic 3 years earlier. Our relationship had deepened through shared challenges and triumphs, but it was still built on the same foundation of mutual trust and affection that had developed during his recovery from highway abandonment. Competition had given us a venue for expressing our partnership, but it had never become more important than the partnership itself. The conversation with Victoria Sterling that had initiated this entire journey felt like it had occurred in a different lifetime, though barely 18 months had passed since that morning at Sunset Hills Dog Park. Her dismissive assessment of Charlie's worth and her certainty about his place in the dog show world had been proven wrong in ways that neither of us could have anticipated. But more than proving Victoria wrong, Charlie's success had proven something more important: that worth couldn't be measured by breeding papers or bloodlines, that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, and that partnerships built on love and dedication could achieve extraordinary things when given the opportunity to flourish. Standing in my living room that evening, looking at the collection of ribbons and trophies that now covered an entire wall, I realized that our greatest victory hadn't been any single competition or championship. Our greatest victory had been the transformation of how people thought about mixed-breed dogs and their potential for excellence. Charlie had started as a highway rescue with unknown breeding and uncertain prospects. He'd become a champion, whose achievements opened doors for countless other dogs and their handlers. But most importantly, he'd remained exactly what he'd always been: my partner, my friend, and the dog who'd taught me that believing in someone's potential was the first step toward helping them achieve it. The purple and gold ribbon from the Golden State Championship would always hold special significance as the moment when our potential became undeniable reality. But every ribbon that followed, every dog who competed because Charlie had shown them it was possible, every handler who believed in their rescue's abilities because our story had proven such beliefs could be justified, these were the real measures of what we'd accomplished together. Victoria Sterling and Richard Pemberton had been wrong about Charlie's place in their carefully ordered world, But their mistake had led to something more valuable than any vindication: the discovery that their world was bigger, more inclusive, and more wonderful than they'd ever imagined it could be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.